We can get 3 junior engineers for your salary, he smirked during my termination meeting. Nothing personal, just cost cutting. My name is Victor Hale, 55 years old, lead systems engineer at Veltria Housing for 18 years. I'd built their entire infrastructure from scratch, architected every expansion, kept everything running so smoothly that the executives forgot how much the company depended on me. Until they decided they couldn't afford me anymore. I sat across from Graham Vickers, the new chief technology officer who'd been with the company for all of 6 months. He was 42, wore designer glasses, and had an MBA from Cornell. He'd been brought in to modernize operations, which apparently meant cutting the most experienced staff first. The severance package is generous, said Diane from Human Resources, sliding a folder across the table. 2 months' salary, plus your accrued vacation time. I nodded, took the folder and said, "Thank you." "Is that all you have to say?" Graham looked almost disappointed. Maybe he'd expected me to argue or threaten legal action, give him something to tell the board about how difficult I was being. "What would you like me to say?" "Most people in your position have questions, concerns." I shrugged. "Seems pretty straightforward to me." Graham exchanged glances with Diane, who looked equally perplexed by my calm. What they didn't understand was that I wasn't calm. I was just done. There's a difference. "Well, we'd appreciate your help with the transition," Graham continued. "The new engineering team will need some guidance on the system architecture. Perhaps a consulting arrangement for a few weeks." "I'll think about it," I said, knowing I wouldn't. We shook hands. I cleared out my desk without complaint. 18 years of work fit into a single cardboard box. I nodded goodbye to a few colleagues who looked away awkwardly, afraid the same fate awaited them. As I walked to my truck in the parking garage, my phone buzzed. A text from Alan, the database administrator I'd hired 12 years ago. "This is bullshit, Vic. The whole team's freaking out." I didn't respond. At home, I sat on my deck overlooking Lake Ontario, nursing a glass of bourbon, watching the sunset paint the water copper. My wife Elaine placed a hand on my shoulder. "What will you do now?" I shrugged. "Something will turn up." What Graham didn't know, what he hadn't bothered to learn, was that I hadn't just built their systems. I had custom-coded large sections myself with minimal documentation, because the company had always refused to fund a proper documentation team. Only I understood the deep redundancies, the hidden security layers, the intricate network architecture, and I wasn't planning to explain it to anyone now. I started at Veltria Housing back when it was called Bayview Properties, a small real estate management firm with 4 apartment complexes and a dozen employees. Their entire IT infrastructure consisted of 2 desktop computers, a fax machine, and a dial-up internet connection. The owner, Harold Bayview, hired me away from a consulting gig in Syracuse. "We're expanding," he told me. "Need someone who can build us something solid." Over 18 years, I'd turned that rudimentary setup into an integrated property management system that handled everything from tenant applications and background checks to automated maintenance requests and rent collection across 63 properties in 4 states. I'd built it piece by piece, adapting, upgrading, refining as the company grew. When Harold retired 5 years ago, his son Justin sold the company to a private equity firm that rebranded it as Veltria Housing. They kept me on, impressed by what I'd built, but things began to change. New executives, new priorities. Quarterly targets became more important than long-term stability. My warning signs came gradually. First, they rejected my proposal for a documentation team. "Too expensive," they said. "We'll get to it next quarter." That quarter never came. Then they started bringing in consultants. Young MBA types who talked about disrupting property management and leveraging cloud solutions. They'd sit through my explanations of our system architecture with glazed eyes, then recommend off-the-shelf solutions that wouldn't integrate with our custom infrastructure. I kept pushing back, explaining why their approach wouldn't work, showing them the custom code that made our system unique. Eventually, they stopped inviting me to planning meetings. Elaine noticed it before I did. "They're pushing you out," she said one night over dinner. You need to prepare. I brushed her off. They need me. No one else understands how the whole system works together. That might be exactly the problem, she replied. 6 months ago, they hired Graham as the new CTO. He came from a banking software company and immediately started talking about standardization and legacy system replacement. He hired 3 junior engineers fresh out of college, had them shadowing me, asking questions about the system. I answered their questions, but I knew they weren't grasping the complexities. How could they? It had taken me years to build those systems, to understand the interdependencies, to create the redundancies that kept everything running smoothly when problems arose. Last week, Graham stopped by my office. "Quick meeting tomorrow morning," he said casually. "Just a quarterly check-in." I should have seen it coming. The first call came 2 weeks after my termination. I was in my home office updating my resume when my phone rang. Graham Vickers. I let it go to voicemail. "Victor, it's Graham. We're having some issues with the tenant portal. The junior team is working on it, but they're having trouble understanding some of your code architecture. Could you give us a call back? It would just be a quick consultation." I deleted the message and went back to my resume. 3 more calls came that day, each voicemail sounding increasingly desperate. By evening, Alan texted me. "System's been down all day. Maintenance requests aren't processing. Graham's losing his mind." The next morning, Diane from HR called. "Victor, I hope you're doing well. I'm calling because we'd like to discuss a consulting arrangement, just temporary, to help with some current system issues. The compensation would be quite generous." I picked up my phone. "How generous?" $300 per hour, minimum 4-hour engagement." "I'll think about it and get back to you," I said, then hung up. I sat at my kitchen table, staring out at the lake. Elaine placed a cup of coffee in front of me. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking they're finding out exactly what I'm worth." Over the next 3 days, the calls increased. Graham, Diane, even Justin Bayview, who was still on the board. The tenant portal was down. The maintenance scheduling system was throwing errors. The automatic payment processing had failed, affecting thousands of residents. I didn't respond to any of them. On day 4, an email arrived from Devlin Systems, a regional competitor to Veltria. They managed fewer properties but had been expanding rapidly. The email was from their director of technology, Lawrence Devlin himself. "Victor, I heard about your situation at Veltria. We've always admired your work from afar. Would you be interested in discussing opportunities with us? We're looking to upgrade our entire property management infrastructure." I replied and set up a meeting for the following day. That evening, as Elaine and I were preparing dinner, my doorbell rang. Graham Vickers stood on my porch, his designer glasses slightly askew, his normally immaculate suit wrinkled. "Victor, I apologize for dropping by unannounced, but we have an emergency situation. The entire system is down. Nothing is working. The team can't figure out what's wrong or how to fix it." I leaned against the doorframe. "That sounds serious." "It is. We need your help. The board has authorized me to offer you a substantial consulting fee, $500 per hour, whatever it takes." I thought about the cardboard box in my garage, 18 years of work reduced to a few mementos. I thought about nothing personal, just cost-cutting. I thought about the documentation team they'd never approved. "I'm sorry to hear about your troubles," I said quietly. "But I have an interview tomorrow. Something will turn up, just like I thought." I closed the door on his stunned face and went back to making dinner. For the first time since my termination, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. Not satisfaction, not vindication, just clarity. I wasn't going to help them fix what they'd broken. The interview with Lawrence Devlin went better than expected. We met at a coffee shop in downtown Rochester, away from both companies' offices. "I've followed your work for years," Lawrence said, stirring his coffee. "That integrated property management system you built at Veltria is legendary in our industry. Nobody else has anything close to it." "Thank you," I said. "It took time." That's what I want to talk about, time. We're looking to build something similar, but we don't want to start from scratch. We need someone who understands the architecture, the integration points, the security layers. Someone who can build us something better than what's out there. I'm interested. Lawrence smiled. Good, because I'm prepared to offer you the position of Chief Systems Architect. Full benefits, stock options, and a salary 20% higher than what you were making at Veltria. It was a good offer. Too good, almost. Why me? I asked. There are younger engineers out there, cheaper ones. Lawrence laughed. You sound like your former employer. We tried that route. Hired 3 bright young engineers from top schools. They built us something sleek and modern that crashes every time we get more than 100 simultaneous users. We don't need cheap. We need reliable. I accepted the offer the next day. Meanwhile, Veltria's problems were escalating. Alan kept me updated through occasional texts. The system had been partially restored, but critical functions were still failing. They'd brought in an expensive consulting firm that specialized in legacy system recovery. A week after I started at Devlin, Graham called again. Victor, please, this is getting serious. We've lost access to payment records for the past 3 months. Tenants are complaining about incorrect charges. The consulting team says they need your input on the database structure. I was tempted to ignore it, but something made me pick up. Graham, I'm employed elsewhere now. Exclusive contract. I'm afraid I can't help you. We'll double whatever they're paying you for just 2 days of your time. It's not about the money. Then what is it about? Revenge? Are you enjoying watching us struggle? I paused, considering my answer carefully. No, Graham, I'm not enjoying it. But you made a business decision. You decided my experience wasn't worth the cost. Now you're discovering what that actually means. The board wants to discuss bringing you back. Full salary, plus a signing bonus. For a moment I felt a flicker of satisfaction, but it quickly faded. Going back would solve nothing. The same executives who decided I was expendable would be waiting for the next opportunity to cut costs. I appreciate the offer, but I've made a commitment to Devlin Systems. Graham's voice hardened. You know, there could be legal implications if we discover you intentionally made our systems difficult to maintain. Non-compete clauses, intellectual property concerns. There it was. The threat I'd been expecting. The system is exactly as it was when the company repeatedly denied my requests for a documentation team, I replied evenly. Every line of code belongs to Veltria, as specified in my employment contract. I've taken nothing with me except my experience, but feel free to have your lawyers contact mine. I hung up, hands shaking slightly. Not from fear, but from anger I hadn't allowed myself to feel until now. The accusation that I'd somehow sabotaged them was the final insult. At Devlin, I was starting fresh, building systems properly from the ground up, with full documentation, training programs for the engineering team, and redundancies that would prevent the kind of catastrophe Veltria was experiencing. I wasn't going to look back anymore, but I wasn't going to help them either. Some lessons had to be learned the hard way. A month after joining Devlin Systems, I received an unexpected visitor in my new office. Alan, my former database administrator, stood awkwardly in the doorway, holding a laptop bag. Got time for lunch? He asked. Over sandwiches at a nearby deli, Alan filled me in on the chaos at Veltria. It's worse than you think, he said, lowering his voice despite the noisy lunchtime crowd. They've lost access to historical data going back 3 years. The backup systems are corrupted somehow. The consulting firm is saying they might need to rebuild from scratch. I wasn't surprised. The backup system had multiple redundancies and security protocols that needed to be followed precisely. Skip one step, and the entire process would fail in a way designed to protect tenant data from unauthorized access. That's not all, Alan continued. I found something when I was trying to help the consultants understand the payment processing system. Graham had been planning your termination for months. He'd been meeting with the board, convincing them that your custom infrastructure was too expensive to maintain. How do you know this? Alan pulled out his laptop and showed me a series of emails he'd discovered in the system archives. Emails between Graham and the board discussing the legacy staff reduction plan and specifically naming me as the first target. He told them they could replace you with cheaper engineers and transition to off-the-shelf solutions within 6 months, Alan said. He projected cost savings of over $1 million annually. I read through the emails, feeling a strange detachment. One line from Graham stood out. Hale's custom systems are unnecessarily complex. He's made himself indispensable by design, not necessity. There's more, Alan said. The private equity firm that owns Veltria is planning to sell. They've been prepping for this for over a year. Graham was brought in specifically to cut costs and make the company look more profitable before the sale. Now it all made sense. The push for standardization, the resistance to proper documentation, the sudden focus on reducing senior staff costs. It wasn't about improving the company, it was about dressing it up for a quick flip. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. Alan closed his laptop. "Because I quit yesterday, and I'm not the only one. Half the IT department has left. The consultants are estimating at least 6 months to restore full functionality, maybe longer." He hesitated. "And because Veltria's biggest client, Westbrook Properties, is considering jumping ship. They've lost faith in the management system." I thought about the implications. Westbrook represented nearly 30% of Veltria's revenue. Losing them would be devastating, especially with a sale pending. "What will you do now?" I asked. Alan grinned. "Actually, I was hoping Devlin might be hiring database administrators." Later that afternoon, I spoke with Lawrence about bringing Alan on board. He agreed immediately. We were building a team, brick by brick, with people who understood what it meant to create systems that lasted. That evening, I received another call from Graham. This time, his voice had lost its authoritative edge. "Victor, please. The situation is critical. Westbrook is threatening to terminate their contract. The board is questioning my decisions. We need your help." "I'm sorry, Graham, I can't help you. Name your price, anything." "It's not about price. It's about respect for experience, for the work that goes into building something right the first time." The line was silent for a moment. "You knew this would happen," he said finally. "You knew exactly what would break and when." "No, Graham. I just knew what I had built, and what it took to maintain it. Information I tried to share many times." I ended the call feeling neither triumph nor regret. Just the quiet certainty that some lessons can only be learned through failure. The opportunity came faster than I expected. 2 months into my role at Devlin Systems, Lawrence called me into his office. "I just got off the phone with Jeffrey Westbrook," he said, referring to the CEO of Westbrook Properties. "They're officially terminating their contract with Veltria next month. They want to know if we can handle their portfolio." Westbrook Properties managed over 10,000 units across the Northeast. It would more than double Devlin's current operations. "We're not ready for that kind of scale," I admitted. "The new system is coming along, but it's only halfway there." Lawrence leaned forward. "What would it take to get ready, if we had to?" I thought about it. 3 more senior engineers, dedicated server infrastructure, and at least 8 weeks of development time. Even then, it would be tight. "Jeffrey's desperate. Veltria's failures are affecting their reputation with tenants. He's willing to give us 12 weeks and fund the infrastructure expansion." This was the moment. The turning point. If Devlin took on Westbrook and succeeded, it would establish us as a serious competitor in the industry. If we failed, it could sink both companies. "Let me think about the architecture," I said. "I'll draw up a plan by tomorrow." That night, I barely slept. I sketched system diagrams, mapped data migration pathways, considered scaling challenges. By morning, I had a plan, ambitious but achievable. A hybrid approach that would let us onboard Westbrook's properties in stages, minimizing disruption. When I presented it to Lawrence, he studied it carefully. "This is solid," he said finally. "But I notice you've included a substantial documentation phase. That adds 3 weeks to the timeline." "It's non-negotiable," I replied. "That's where Veltria failed. We document everything from day one. We train the team on every component. No single points of failure." Lawrence nodded. "I'll take your word for it. Let's move forward." The next weeks were intense. We hired 5 more engineers, including 2 who had recently left Veltria. Alan built a database migration tool that could translate Veltria's data structure into our new system. I designed a modular architecture that could scale with Westbrook's needs. Halfway through the project, I received an email from Justin Bayview, the former owner's son who still sat on Veltria's board. "Victor, I want to apologize for how things ended. The board was misled about the implications of letting you go. Graham has been removed as CTO. We're struggling to recover, and Westbrook's departure will hit us hard. If you're ever interested in coming back, the door is open." I didn't respond. 10 weeks into our 12-week timeline, we were ready for a staged rollout. Westbrook's smallest region, comprising 2,000 units in western New York, would migrate first. If successful, the remaining regions would follow. The day before the migration, Lawrence called me into his office again. A familiar face was waiting. Jeffrey Westbrook himself. "So you're the system architect?" Jeffrey said, standing to shake my hand. "Lawrence has told me a lot about you." "All good, I hope." Jeffrey smiled. "He says you've built us something that won't break down every time we add a new property. Something that will grow with us." "That's the plan." "I also hear you used to work for Veltria." I nodded, unsure where he was going with this. "They're in trouble, you know. The private equity firm is trying to sell, but with Westbrook leaving and their system still not fully functional, they're not finding many interested buyers." He paused. "Except one." "Who's that?" I asked, though I suspected the answer. "Devlin Systems," Lawrence said. "We're considering making an offer, at a substantial discount to what they were valued at 6 months ago." I looked between them, processing the implications. "If that happens," Jeffrey continued, "we'd want someone who understands both companies to lead the integration. Someone who could salvage what's valuable from Veltria's infrastructure while transitioning everything to your new architecture." "Are you asking if I'd be willing to work on that?" I clarified. Lawrence nodded. "Only if the acquisition goes through, and only if you're comfortable with it." I thought about the irony. The system I'd built, the people I'd trained, the company that had discarded me, all potentially coming back under my direction. "I'd be willing," I said finally. "But I have one condition. We do it right. Full documentation, proper training, no shortcuts." "Agreed," Lawrence said. "We've learned that lesson." As I walked back to my office, I felt no vindication, no desire for revenge. Just the simple satisfaction of knowing that good work, done right, eventually speaks for itself. 6 months later, I stood in the lobby of what had once been Veltria Housing's headquarters. The sign now read, "Devlin Integrated Property Management." The acquisition had gone through for less than a quarter of what the company had been valued at before my departure. Lawrence and I walked through the office, greeting former Veltria employees who would be staying on through the transition. Some looked away awkwardly. Others smiled with relief. A few, those who had worked closely with me over the years, nodded with quiet understanding. Graham was gone, along with most of the executive team that had approved my termination. Justin Bayview had stayed on as a consultant, helping ease the transition with legacy clients. When we reached the server room, my old domain, I paused. Through the glass, I could see the hardware I'd specified, the blinking lights of systems I'd designed. "Want to go in?" Lawrence asked. "No need," I replied. "We'll be migrating everything to the new infrastructure anyway." In the main conference room, the remaining Veltria staff had gathered for the announcement. Lawrence introduced me as the Chief Integration Officer, who would be overseeing the technical transition. "Many of you already know Victor," he said. "He built the original systems that ran this company for nearly 2 decades. Now he'll be guiding us through the integration of both companies' technologies into something better than either had before." As I looked out at the faces, some familiar, some new, I felt no triumph, no desire to say, "I told you so." What would be the point? Instead, I spoke briefly about the transition plan, the timeline, the support that would be available to everyone during the process. I emphasized that no one would be left behind due to cost-cutting measures. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. 1 year after the acquisition, Devlin Integrated Property Management had become the largest property management company in the Northeast. The migration was complete, with all properties now running on the new system I designed. Fully documented, properly staffed, and functioning smoothly. On a crisp autumn morning, I drove to the office for a final meeting with Lawrence. The leaves along Lake Ontario had turned brilliant shades of red and gold, a fitting backdrop for the conclusion of this chapter. "The board approved your proposal," Lawrence said as soon as I sat down. "The Technical Education Division will launch next quarter. You'll have full autonomy to design the curriculum and hire instructors." This had been my condition for staying after the integration was complete. Not a higher title or more money, but the creation of a division dedicated to training the next generation of systems engineers and architects, teaching them not just how to code, but how to build things meant to last. "Thank you," I said. "That means a lot." "No, thank you," Lawrence replied. "What you've built here, it's remarkable. Not just the technology, but the culture around it. The documentation, the knowledge sharing, the emphasis on quality over quick fixes." Later that afternoon, I cleared out my integration office. Unlike my hasty exit from Veltria, this was a planned transition to my new role. As I packed my things, Justin Bayview knocked on the door. "Got a minute?" he asked. We walked to the small courtyard outside the building. "My father asked about you," he said. "He's retired in Florida now, but he still follows company news. He was glad to hear you were back, in a manner of speaking." "How is Harold?" I asked. "Good. Fishing a lot." Justin paused. "He always said letting you go would be the biggest mistake this company could make. Turns out he was right." I nodded, unsure what to say. "I learned something from all this," Justin continued. "Value isn't always visible until it's gone." As I drove home along the lakeshore, I thought about value, of experience, of care taken, of doing things right the first time, about systems built to last and the people who build them. I hadn't sought revenge. I hadn't needed to. I'd simply moved forward, building something better, something that would outlast any individual decision or short-term thinking. Sometimes the best response to being undervalued is simply to prove your worth elsewhere, and let the results speak for themselves.